Global X interviews social entrepreneurs who tackle some of the world's biggest problems. They are pioneers of innovation that benefit humanity.
My name is Saad Eddin Ibrahim. I am a professor of political sociology in the American University in Cairo. But my claim to fame is being a human rights defender, a human rights activist, something I've been doing for the last 40 years. And that's why I keep getting invited to this great place, the Khaldun Center. President Carter is one of my mentors. He is a role model for me. And I am honored to be part of this community, having come here immediately after I was released from prison back in 1973. And that was the first forum for the human rights defenders. And I came to it. They heard my story. They had already known about my travail, so to speak. And I have continued after I was released from prison by a ruling from the High Court, and 27 of my colleagues were also in prison. They were all released same time. We were all acquitted of all the charges which the Mubarak regime has trumped up against us. As many stories that I heard around this center and elsewhere, wherever human rights defenders or activists get together, their stories are pretty similar. They are speaking truth to power, and that's why they get in trouble with tyrannical rulers in their countries. And my story is one of those. So there's nothing unusual about it. There are hundreds who are doing the same thing. Some are noted and recognized. Others go and struggle silently. So that is briefly my story. It was an afternoon in Egypt. I was supposed to be again locked up in my cell, but for my surprise, my cell opened and I was ushered by the guards to go to the wardens in their quarter. And it was very unusual, and I thought maybe they are going to release me. When I got to the warden's quarter, I found television on and CNN. And it was in English, and they remembered that somebody in prison knows English. So they brought me in to translate because it didn't make sense to them. This was before the Arabic news came on, and because there was no Egyptian reporters on the scene, Egyptian television hooked on with CNN. So these officers wanted to know what was going on. It didn't make sense. So I began to translate to them to make sense. But then midway, I remembered that my wife was visiting America to receive an award on my behalf, and she was within 3 blocks from where the World Trade Center was. And my daughter was joining her. She went a few days earlier, and my daughter was also joining her, and she was on her way to the United States. When I remembered that both my wife and my daughter may be within the site of this terrible explosion, I began all of a sudden to realize that here I am in prison and my family is in an imminent danger in New York. So I couldn't help but, tears came to my eyes, not only for the tragedy of what happened to 9/11, seeing people throwing themselves out of the building, but also because of the immediate concern about my family. Of course, the officers that I was translating or interpreting to had no idea, and I didn't care to share my own personal sense or feeling of tragedy with them. So I just kept silent, and they didn't understand why I was in tears. But, finally ushered me back to my cell, where I spent the night, sleepless night, worrying about my wife and my daughter. 2 days later, I get a message they were fine. What I would love to see the world 10 years from now is to be freer and more democratic and less hungry. I'd like to see poverty eradicated, and with poverty eradicated, justice, peace, and democracy would make the world a happier place for the rest of mankind. That is my hope. That's what I'm working for my own country, for my own people, for my region. And I believe that with democracy, justice, and development, peace could prevail. These are ingredients that could lead to peace. That's what made Europe what it is today. I have followed the process of European reunification. This is a long stretch in the history of Europe with no war. I mean, talking about Western Europe, this is one of the, I consider that the 20th century miracle, political miracle, is the reunification of Europe, or the unification of Europe. And I'm using this as an example for my bedeviled region, the Middle East, which has had more than its share of armed violence over the last 50 years. So I'm hoping that some of what I'm doing, my struggle for freedom and justice in our region, will lead to the kind of peace and prosperity that Europe is enjoying now.
Global X is also on Social Edge at socialedge.org.